They laughed. Not the polite kind of laugh, not the nervous kind where someone's secretly cheering for you. No. They laughed the way people laugh when a child says they want to be an astronaut. Like it was cute. Like it was something I'd get over. My uncle set his fork down. I still remember that. The small, deliberate clink of metal against ceramic. He looked at my mother, and something passed between them. One of those wordless conversations that families have when they've already decided something before the meeting even starts. And then he said it. Quiet. Almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. Give it 6 months. That was 2 years ago, and this past Tuesday morning, before my second coffee, before I'd even properly woken up, I opened my phone and I sent him one screenshot. Just one. No caption, no explanation, no I told you so. I didn't need to say anything. The numbers said everything. But here's the part they never tell you about revenge. The part nobody talks about in the success stories. It isn't clean. It doesn't feel the way you imagined it would when you were sitting at that dinner table, staring at your plate, swallowing down the humiliation with a mouthful of rice you couldn't even taste anymore. Because to get to that screenshot, I had to go through things I'm still not entirely over. And this is that story. Let me take you back. My name is Zara, and the version of me that sat at that dinner table 2 years ago, she was someone I barely recognize now. Not because she was weak. She wasn't. She was just trying so hard to be seen that she'd forgotten to look at what was right in front of her. I grew up in a family where success had a very specific shape. It looked like a government job or a corporate salary with a name badge and a pension. It looked like a wedding before 30 and a house in a respectable neighborhood. It did not, under any circumstances, look like a 26-year-old woman who wanted to quit her desk job and build something from nothing on the internet. My father had worked at the same company for 22 years before he retired. My mother considered that loyalty. She talked about it like it was a form of honor. My uncle, Baba's younger brother, the one who thought he was the family's unofficial chairman, had his own import business. Small, but stable. He wore it like a crown. And me? I had spent 3 years at a mid-size marketing firm doing content strategy for brands that sold things I didn't believe in, for audiences I didn't understand, at a salary that sounded fine until I did the math on my actual hourly rate and nearly cried in the car park. But I was good at it, that was the thing. I was genuinely good at building audiences, at understanding what made people stop scrolling, and somewhere around year 2, I started doing it for myself. Small, quiet. At night, after dinner, after my mother had gone to bed, I was building a content brand around South Asian women and financial literacy. Because I looked around and I noticed something. I noticed that nobody was talking to us. Not really. Not in a way that felt honest or real or like the person on the other side of the screen actually understood what it meant to grow up in a household where money was either a shameful secret or a public performance. I started posting. I started building. And slowly, something started to happen. People started listening. Here's the thing about momentum: when you're building something in the dark, it doesn't announce itself. There's no single day where you wake up and go, yes, this is it. It's more like you look up one morning and you realize the ceiling is higher than it was 6 months ago. My email list had grown to 800 people. My Instagram was sitting at just over 4,000 followers, small by any objective measure, but every single one of them had found me on their own. No ads, no big collaborations, just me, a ring light I bought secondhand, and an old laptop that overheated if I had more than 4 tabs open. I was scared to tell my family. I know how that sounds. I was a grown adult, and I was scared. But you have to understand, in my family, an idea doesn't get the chance to develop. It gets evaluated at conception. And if the evaluation goes badly, it doesn't just die quietly, it becomes a story. Something to reference at every gathering for the next decade. Remember when Zara wanted to be a YouTuber? That kind of story. I waited until I felt ready, until I had something concrete to show them. Revenue. Real revenue. Not a lot, $1,100 in my first month of offering paid consultations through my platform. But it was real. It was mine. And it had happened in a weekend. I should have known better than to bring it to the dinner table. But I was so proud. I can still feel it, that particular kind of pride that lives in your chest like a warm coal. I wanted them to see me, not the version of me they'd decided on, but the real one. The one who'd been working through the nights, the one who'd figured something out. I chose a Sunday. My mother had made biryani, the kind that means she's in a good mood. The kitchen smelled like cardamom and slow-cooked meat, and for a moment, for just a second, it felt like the right time. I laid it out as clearly as I could. The platform, the audience, the numbers, the potential. I had printed a one-page summary. I'd actually printed it out, like a pitch deck for my own family. My father listened. He didn't say much. He has a way of listening that used to feel like respect, but which I now understand is just processing. He's a quiet man who defers to louder people. And in our family, my uncle is always the loudest person. My uncle picked up my printed page. He held it at an angle, like he was looking for a watermark. Then he put it down. "So you want to quit your job," he said. "Not a question. I want to transition," I said. "I've already started. To talk to women on the internet about money." He said it flatly, like a diagnosis. My mother made a sound in the back of her throat. That small, private sound she makes when she's embarrassed on my behalf. And that was the moment I should have stopped. I know that now. I should have folded my page back up, put it in my bag, and said, "Never mind, let's just eat." Instead, I kept trying to explain. I talked about digital creator economies. I talked about ad revenue and paid newsletters and community monetization. I used words that made my uncle's expression shift from dismissal to something closer to pity. And then my cousin, who is 22 and has never paid a utility bill in his life, leaned back in his chair and said, "But who's going to pay you for that?" I looked at the biryani, the cardamom, the slow-cooked meat, the careful, optimistic smell of a meal made by a mother who wanted things to go well. Then my uncle said it, gently, like he was doing me a favor. "Give it 6 months, Sarah. If it works, it works. But you should keep your job. This kind of thing, it doesn't last." And my father, my quiet, deferring father. He nodded. Nobody defended me. I didn't cry at the table. I want you to know that. I sat there for another 40 minutes, ate half a plate of food I couldn't taste, answered 2 questions about something completely unrelated, and then I drove home. And then I sat in my car in my own driveway for 23 minutes. The radio was off. My phone was face down on the passenger seat. The neighbor's sprinkler system kicked on, and I watched the water arc back and forth across the concrete in the dark. And I made a decision. Not an angry one. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't rage. Rage would have been easier, honestly. What I felt was something quieter and more dangerous. It was a kind of clarity, the sort that only comes when someone you love finally says out loud the thing you've always feared they believed. I was going to do this. Not to prove them wrong, not for them at all. For the version of me that had been working quietly in the dark for a year already. For her. Section what I was actually walking away from. I need to be honest with you about something because I think it matters. I wasn't walking away from nothing. The job I was thinking about leaving, it was stable, genuinely stable. Health insurance, annual reviews, a manager who actually liked me. I had worked hard for that stability. My parents had worked hard for me to have it. And somewhere underneath the ambition, underneath the content strategy and the email lists and the late nights, there was a voice that sounded a lot like my uncle that kept saying, "But what if they're right?" That's the part I never see in the success stories. The doubt that doesn't come from your enemies, it comes from the people who love you. My mother would call every few days and ask how things were going at the office. Not the platform, the office. She'd ask about my manager by name. She remembered his name. She never asked me the name of a single person on my email list, and I wanted so badly for her to be curious. I wanted her to ask. I would have told her everything. But she didn't ask. And I think part of me, a small, exhausted part, was still waiting for her to. I stayed at the job for 3 more months after that dinner. Not because I'd given up on the platform, I was still posting, still growing, still building, but because I was still trying to find the right moment. The moment when the numbers would be undeniable enough. The moment when even my uncle would have to put down his fork. The thing about waiting for validation from people who've already decided, they move the goalpost. Every single time. I hit 5,000 followers. My mother said, "But are they real followers?" I landed a brand partnership, a small one, with a financial planning app. My uncle said, "One deal isn't a business." I made $3,000 in a single month from a digital course I'd built and sold over a weekend launch. Nobody said anything. Because I'd stopped telling them. I'd finally understood that the dinner table was never going to be the place where this got validated. That's not what it was for. The dinner table was for rice and cardamom and conversations about other people's children and what the neighbor had recently bought. The dinner table was for family as it had already been decided. And I wasn't fitting into the shape they'd already decided I should be. If you've ever been the person at that table, sitting there with something you've built, watching the people you love decide it doesn't count, I want you to know that you're not alone in this. And honestly, if this is hitting close to home right now, this might be worth sharing with someone who needs to hear it. Section: The last morning at the office. I resigned on a Thursday. There's nothing dramatic to say about it. It was a Thursday in early spring, and the office smelled like printer toner and someone's microwaved lunch, and I sat across from my manager in her glass-walled office, and I handed her a letter I'd written and rewritten 7 times. She was kind. She asked if it was a salary issue, and I said no. She asked if I was going somewhere else, and I said, and this is the part I practiced the least, I said I was building something of my own. She paused for a second. Then she said, "Good for you." She meant it. I could tell she meant it. I cleaned out my desk that afternoon. I didn't have much. A small succulent I'd been keeping alive for 18 months, a coffee mug, 2 pens that were actually mine. I put it all in a tote bag, and I took the lift down to the ground floor, and I walked out through the glass doors into the afternoon light. And I thought, nobody in my family knows I just did this. Not yet. I called my mother from the car park, not to tell her I wasn't ready for that conversation. I called her because I needed to hear a familiar voice. She talked to me for 12 minutes about a problem with a relative's wedding. I said and yeah and oh, really, in all the right places. When I hung up, I sat in that car park until the light changed, until the sky went from afternoon pale to that particular shade of orange that always feels like the world asking you something. And then I drove home. and I opened my laptop. And I got back to work. Month 1 on your own is adrenaline. It genuinely is. You wake up and there's no alarm set by someone else's schedule. You make your own coffee at your own pace. You open your laptop and the only inbox you have to answer to is yours. It feels, for about 3 weeks, like freedom in the most uncomplicated sense of the word. And then month 2 arrives. Month 2 is when the silence starts to have texture. When you notice that the only person who's asked how work is going this week is your group chat from university, and even they moved on after 2 messages. Month 2 is when you realize that building something is mostly just sitting alone in a room, making decisions with no feedback loop, no manager to validate you, no colleague to say, yeah, that sounds right. Month 2 is also when my family started their campaign. I want to be precise about that word, campaign, because it wasn't a single confrontation. It wasn't one big argument I could point to and say, that's when it happened. It was quieter than that, smarter than that. And looking back, I think that's what made it so difficult to defend against. It started with my mother. She called me on a Wednesday, I remember, because I just finished filming a video and my ring light was still warm in the corner of the room. She called to tell me that a family friend's daughter had just gotten promoted, regional manager at 28. My mother said it the way she always delivers these pieces of information, carefully, like she's not making a point, like she's just sharing news. I just thought you'd want to know, she said. She's always worked so hard. I said that was great, I genuinely meant it. But the implications sat in the room with me long after the call ended. The next week it was my uncle. He texted, and I want to note that my uncle almost never texts me directly, we're not that kind of close. He texted to tell me he'd seen a news article about how content creator income was unreliable and not sustainable long term. He sent the link without comment. Just the link, like it was a public service. I didn't respond. I saved the article and looked up the publication date. It was from 3 years ago. Then came the dinner. About 6 weeks after I'd left my job, my mother invited me to a family gathering. Not one of the big ones, just a smaller thing, cousins and aunties, the kind of Sunday meal that happens without a formal reason. I almost didn't go. I had a deadline, a brand collaboration deliverable that was due Monday, and I was cutting it close. But my mother used the specific combination of words she knows works on me. She said, I just miss seeing you. So I went. I sat down at that table, and within 10 minutes, I understood that this gathering had a theme. The theme was everyone's children who had stable, impressive, traditionally successful careers. My cousin Sana, same age as me, had just passed her chartered accountancy exams. There was an actual cake. My aunt's son had been promoted at his bank. My mother's friend's daughter, the regional manager, was there in person. And me, I was there too. Nobody asked me anything directly. That's the sophisticated part. Nobody said so. How's your little internet thing going? Nobody had to. Because the conversational architecture of that afternoon was designed so that I didn't have a place in it. At one point, one of my aunties, sweetly, genuinely, I don't think she meant harm, turned to me and said, Zara, are you still job searching or? The table went slightly quiet, the kind of quiet that's really just everyone pausing to listen. I'm not job searching, I said. I run my own business. She nodded slowly. Ah. And that's going well? The specific inflection on well, the fractional pause before it. I felt it like a change in air pressure. Yes, I said, it is. My uncle, from the other end of the table, didn't look up from his plate. Good, good. That was it. 2 words. Delivered with the energy of someone who has already filed your future under a category and is simply waiting for reality to confirm their paperwork. I drove home that night with my jaw tight and the radio on too loud. Not because they'd said anything devastating. That's what I couldn't explain, even to myself. Nobody had said anything overtly cruel. Nothing I could quote back to someone and have them immediately understand. It was the texture of the afternoon. The cumulative weight of 100 tiny exclusions that don't leave bruises but somehow still leave marks. I sat with that feeling for a while, turned it over, tried to decide what was real and what was me being oversensitive. And that's when it started, the part I'm most ashamed of. The self-doubt. Section: The gaslight I did to myself. I need to be honest about this because I think it's the part of the story that actually matters most. The most damaging voice in those months wasn't my uncle's. It wasn't my mother's. It was mine. Because here's what happens when the people whose opinion you've been conditioned to value tell you, not loudly, but consistently, in the gentle architecture of every conversation, that what you're doing isn't real. You start to look at your own work differently. You start to apply their framework to your own numbers. I'd made $4,200 that month. $4,200. From a digital course, 2 brand partnerships, and newsletter sponsorships. That was more than I'd ever made in a single month at my old job, and I sat there at my desk at 11 o'clock at night thinking, but is it consistent? My uncle's voice, in my head, using my own uncertainty as a ventriloquist. I started second-guessing the content I was creating, started wondering if the topics I was covering were too niche, started wondering if the audience I'd built actually trusted me, or if I'd just gotten lucky with an algorithm shift. I posted less. I spent more time editing than creating. I rewrote emails 4 and 5 times before sending them, looking for the flaw that would prove the whole thing wasn't real. This went on for about 3 weeks, and during those 3 weeks, my growth slowed. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. Enough that when I looked at my metrics dashboard, I could see the exact shape of my own self-doubt reflected back at me in a line graph. That was clarifying, actually, in a brutal kind of way. I printed out the graph, looked at it for a long time, traced the line with my finger from the peak to the dip, and tried to remember what had happened in those weeks. The family dinner, the article my uncle sent, the Wednesday phone call. I hadn't changed my strategy. I hadn't lost my audience. I'd just started listening to people who weren't in the room when I built the thing. Be honest with me. Have you ever talked yourself out of something because you started hearing someone else's doubt in your own head? I think about this more than I'd like to admit. Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know if this is just me. About 4 months in, something happened that shifted the entire texture of what was going on. I need to tell this part carefully because it involves someone I still have to sit across from at family events. But it's the part that changed me from someone who was quietly doubting herself into someone who started paying very close attention. My platform had grown to the point where I was getting inbound enquiries, not just followers, actual business enquiries. People wanting to license my content framework for their own teams, brands wanting longer-term ambassador relationships, a media company that had reached out about a potential podcast collaboration. I hadn't announced any of this publicly yet. I was still in early conversations, feeling things out. But my cousin, my uncle's son, the 22-year-old who'd once asked who was going to pay me, had apparently been following my account, and he'd mentioned it to his father. I know this because my mother told me, casually. The way she tells me things she doesn't realize are loaded. She said, "Your uncle was asking about your page. He wants to know how much you charge for those collaborations." I went very still. "Why?" I asked. She shrugged. "He said he has a friend who might be interested. for his business. Some promotion thing. I put my tea down on the counter. Thought about it for a second. The man who had told me to give it 6 months. The man who had sent me a 3-year-old article about content creator income being unsustainable. That man was now asking, through my mother, what I charged for brand collaborations. Not to support me, not to say he'd been wrong, to potentially extract a commercial favor from something he'd told me wouldn't work. I didn't answer my mother right away. I said I'd think about it. I needed a minute to understand what I was actually feeling, because my first instinct was anger, and I've learned not to make decisions inside anger. Anger is loud and obvious. It announces itself. It gives people the chance to make you the problem. What I eventually felt, once the anger settled, was something much colder, much more useful. I felt like I finally understood the rules of the game I was playing. Section, the audit, when I started paying attention. There's a version of this story where I call my uncle and say what I was thinking, where I confront the dynamic directly and have a very honest conversation about what had been going on for the past 4 months. I didn't do that. Not because I was afraid, but because I'd started to understand that visible emotion was a form of currency in my family, and I'd been spending it carelessly. Every time I reacted, every time I let something land on my face at a dinner table, I handed over something they could use later. Zara overreacts. Zara takes things too personally. Zara can't handle criticism. I was done handing things over. Instead, I started doing something I wish I'd done months earlier. I started keeping records, not of grievances, not a list of things people said that hurt me, that would have kept me stuck, kept me rehearsing wounds instead of building. No, I started keeping very precise records of my own business, revenue, month by month, growth metrics, partnership values, every email enquiry that came in, logged with the date and the amount and the outcome. It sounds clinical. It was supposed to be. I needed to build a case, not for my family, not for anyone else, but for myself. For the version of me that still woke up at 3 a.m, wondering if she'd made a catastrophic mistake. Month 4, $6,200, up 47% from month 3. Month 5, a podcast collaboration launched. 8,000 downloads in the first 2 weeks. My email list crossed 3,000 subscribers. Month 6, the month my uncle had originally given me as my deadline, I had my first 5-figure month, $10,340. I remember the exact number because I sat and looked at it on my screen for a long time, long enough that my coffee went cold. $10,000. In 30 days, from content I had built, from an audience I had grown, from a business that my family had politely decided didn't exist. I didn't tell anyone. I just saved the screenshot. I saved every screenshot. About a week after my 6-month mark, my mother came to visit, unannounced, which she does sometimes, shows up with food and a half pretext, and we both pretend it's casual. She came in, put food in the fridge, made tea in my kitchen with the ease of someone who was here last week instead of last month. And we sat at my little kitchen table, and she looked around the flat the way mothers look around their children's spaces, cataloging, assessing, checking for signs of distress. "You seem better," she said finally. "I am better," I said. "Work is going well?" And this one time, I think she was actually asking, not performing a conversation topic, actually asking. I looked at her for a second, decided something. "It's going really well, Mama." "How well?" I told her the number. Not all of them, just the most recent month. I said it plainly, the way you'd read a number off a page. She went quiet, not the dismissive kind of quiet from the dinner table. This was something else. She looked at her tea. Then she said, almost to herself, "That's more than your father made in 2 months." I didn't say anything. "And this is consistent?" she asked. "It's been growing consistently for 6 months." Another silence. She wrapped both hands around her mug. Outside, a car went past. The refrigerator hummed. "I worry," she said quietly. "That's all it is. I know you think it's something else. But it's just, I worry." "I know," I said. And I did know. That was the complicated part. I'd always known. She didn't apologize. I didn't expect her to. But something in the room shifted that afternoon, something small and permanent. She asked me to explain what I actually did. Not the surface version, the actual mechanics. How the money worked, what the partnerships meant, what the platform was for. So I told her. All of it. The way I'd have explained it to a journalist or an investor, clearly, specifically, without leaving out the hard parts. The months of uncertainty. The metrics dip when I let other people's doubt into my head. The 5-figure month at the 6-month mark. The pipeline of work coming in for the next quarter. She listened. Really listened. The way she listens when she's deciding something. When I finished, she said, "Your uncle doesn't need to know all of this." I looked at her. "He'll find a way to make it about him," she said simply. "He always does." My mother, quietly handing me the map of a territory she'd been navigating for 30 years. I wasn't angry with her anymore after that conversation. I understood, for the first time, the specific shape of her fear. She hadn't been trying to undermine me, she'd been trying to protect me the only way she knew how, by getting me to lower my profile before someone else did it for me. She'd been conditioned too. We both had. Section, month 8, the moment I became a strategist. I want to tell you about the day I stopped being a victim of this story and started being its author. It wasn't dramatic. It happened on a Tuesday. I know that because Tuesdays are when I do my weekly review, revenue, content performance, pipeline. I had just finished logging my numbers for the week when an email arrived. It was from a PR agency I'd worked with once on a small collaboration. They were reaching out about a campaign. A financial services brand, a big one, was looking for a South Asian female voice in the financial literacy space. They'd found me through a mutual contact. The budget they named for a 3-month campaign made me sit very still in my chair. Not because I hadn't made good money before, but because this was the kind of number that had a different gravity. The kind that meant this wasn't a side project anymore, hadn't been for a while, but now even the external world was starting to confirm it. I replied professionally, scheduled a call, did all the right things. And then I sat back and I thought about that dinner table. About the fork being set down. About 6 months. We were at month 8. The 6 months had come and gone, and the only thing that had collapsed was the timeline they'd given me. I opened a new folder on my laptop, named it something boring, Archive 2024, so I'd never accidentally open it in a moment of weakness and spiral, and into it I put every screenshot I'd been saving since month 1. Revenue statements, partnership emails, audience growth reports. The podcast metrics, the enquiry log I'd been keeping. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew I was building towards something. I had 9 months of receipts. And I was just getting started. If you're in your own month 2 or month 4 right now, if you're building quietly while people around you wait for you to fail, I want you to keep going. And if this story is finding you at the right time, share it with someone who's in the middle of their own quiet war. Sometimes you just need to know someone else made it through. Section: what I discovered about my uncle and what I did next. Here's the thing about people who dismiss you publicly: they tend to monitor you privately. I started noticing that my engagement metrics included a recurring viewer I didn't recognize. It took me a while to confirm what I suspected. The username was generic, the account was new, and it followed nobody except me and 2 industry accounts. But the device fingerprint, which my analytics platform showed in aggregate, matched a location and a browsing pattern I knew well. My uncle had been watching every single video I posted for at least 3 months. Not liking, not commenting, just watching, tracking. The way you monitor something you've already bet against, checking to see if you were right. I felt something complicated when I confirmed this. Not triumph exactly, more like the specific, hollow feeling you get when a theory about someone you love turns out to be correct. You wanted to be wrong. You almost wish you were. But I wasn't, and now I had to decide what to do with that. The old version of me, the one who'd sat at that dinner table with a printed pitch deck, would have confronted him, would have sent a message or brought it up at the next gathering, would have made it emotional and given him the perfect opportunity to make me the irrational one. I didn't do any of that. I made content. Specifically, I made the most strategic, precise, well-researched piece of content I'd ever produced. A 6-part series on how South Asian women build generational wealth outside of traditional career paths. It covered investment, digital business models, the psychological barriers that family and culture create around female financial ambition, and, in the final installment, it featured real data on creator economy income stability over a 24-month period. Every video was sharp. Every video was documented. Every video was aimed, quietly and precisely, at every assumption that had been made about me since that dinner. The series got more views than anything I'd ever posted. My email list went from 3,000 to just over 9,000 in 6 weeks. And every single video was watched by that same anonymous account. Every single one. Let me tell you about the month everything accelerated, month 14, late autumn. I remember the specific quality of the light through my office window, flat, gray, the kind of afternoon that makes everything look like a rough draft. I was on back-to-back calls, a quarterly review with my longest-running brand partner, a strategy session with a freelance editor I'd brought on 2 months earlier, and then a discovery call with a media production company that had found me through my podcast series. That last call lasted 47 minutes. When it ended, I sat at my desk and stared at my notepad. They wanted to develop a long-form documentary series with me. Co-production. My platform, my audience, their infrastructure. The kind of project that doesn't come looking for you when you're still in month 2, doubting yourself in the dark. I wrote the number down on the notepad, looked at it, then wrote it again underneath, because sometimes you need to see a thing twice before your brain actually processes it. I closed my laptop, put on my coat, went for a walk around the block because my flat suddenly felt too small for everything I was thinking. Outside, it was cold and slightly damp, and a woman was walking a dog that had stopped to investigate a drain. Completely ordinary, the kind of ordinary Tuesday afternoon that doesn't know it's the backdrop of something significant. I thought about the dinner table. I thought about the fork being set down, the silence that followed. Give it 6 months. We were at month 14, and I had just been offered a co-production deal by a media company. Here's the thing I want to be honest about, and I think this matters. I didn't feel what I expected to feel. I'd spent months imagining a moment like this. Imagined it as triumph, as vindication, as the specific, clean satisfaction of being definitively, undeniably right. What I actually felt was tired. Not in a defeated way, in the way you feel tired after carrying something heavy for a very long time and finally being able to set it down. A specific, earned exhaustion that lives in your shoulders and your jaw and the back of your eyes. I'd been carrying the weight of their doubt for over a year, and now that I didn't need to anymore, now that the numbers and the opportunities and the trajectory had made the argument for me, I realized how much energy I'd spent on it. Energy I could have used to build faster, to rest, to be less afraid. I walked back inside, made tea, and started drafting the response email. Section, the gathering, my uncle's business comes up at the wrong moment. About 3 weeks after that call, there was another family gathering. This one was unavoidable, a milestone birthday for my grandmother. Everyone would be there. I want to be precise about my emotional state going in. I wasn't looking for a confrontation. I genuinely wasn't. I'd reached a point, sometime around month 12, where my uncle's opinion of my business had stopped functioning as a referendum on my worth. It had just become irrelevant. Background noise from a frequency I'd gradually stopped tuning into. But something happened at that gathering that I didn't engineer and didn't expect. My uncle's import business was struggling. I found this out the way you find out things in large families, in pieces, through overheard conversations, and the way certain people avoid certain topics. A cousin mentioned supply chain issues. An auntie made a comment about the business moving to smaller premises. And at one point, in the kitchen, I heard my uncle on his phone talking about an invoice in a voice I'd never heard him use before. Tightly controlled, slightly too careful, the voice of someone managing something they're not ready to name out loud. I felt something I didn't want to feel. Sympathy. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I think it's the most important sentence in this entire story. I felt sympathy for the man who dismissed everything I'd built. Not because he deserved it, that's not really how sympathy works, but because I understood, in a way I hadn't fully before, that his dismissal of me had never really been about me. It had been about him, about a man who had built his identity around being the one in the family who understood business, who'd worn that authority like a coat for 30 years, and here was his niece, young, female, operating in a world he didn't recognize, using tools he didn't understand, quietly building something that was outperforming the thing he'd spent 3 decades constructing. That's not just threatening, that's the kind of thing that reorganizes a person's entire understanding of themselves. I'm not excusing it. But I understand it now in a way I didn't when I was sitting at the dinner table with my printed pitch deck. I didn't say anything to him that day. I helped my grandmother cut her cake. I ate too many samosas. I drove home in the dark. Section, month 22, the campaign goes public. Here's where the pacing of this story changes. I'm going to move faster now, because this is the part that actually happened quickly. After a year and 10 months of slow, careful, intentional building, things started moving at a speed I wasn't entirely prepared for. The documentary series got a launch date. My team, and I want to pause on that phrase, because 18 months earlier I didn't have a team, I had a secondhand ring light and an overheating laptop. My team was now 4 people. A content editor, a social media manager, a business development consultant, and a part-time researcher. My platform crossed 40,000 subscribers. The launch campaign for the documentary series got picked up by 3 industry publications. One of them ran a profile on me, a real one, with a photographer, not a headshot from my phone. The headline used the phrase South Asia's most compelling financial voice for a new generation. I sent my mother the link without comment. She called me within 4 minutes. She was crying, very quietly. The way she cries when she's proud, but hasn't got the exact language for it yet. I'm going to frame this, she said, the article. I'm going to print it and frame it. Mama, I said, You told me it wouldn't last. A pause. I know. Another pause. I'm sorry, Zara. 3 words. 2 years in the making. And somehow, they landed exactly as heavy as I needed them to. Not crushing, not reopening anything, just acknowledged. Thank you, I said. And I meant it. We talked for an hour after that. Really talked. Not the coded conversations of the past 2 years. She told me things about her own ambitions, the ones she'd set aside, things I'd never known. And I understood, sitting there with the phone warm against my ear, that this moment was also a kind of inheritance. That she was, in her own way, watching me live a version of something she'd never let herself try. I didn't ask her about my uncle, she didn't bring him up, but I'd already decided what I was going to do. 2 years. 2 years, 1 month, and 11 days after that dinner. I woke up on a Tuesday, made coffee, opened my phone, checked my dashboard, a habit I've had since month 1, the first thing I do every morning before I'm fully awake. And there it was, the number I'd been quietly watching build toward for 26 months. My annual platform revenue, consulting, partnerships, the documentary deal, digital products, speaking engagements, had crossed into territory that I'm not going to name publicly. Because the moment you name a number, people stop hearing the story and start doing the arithmetic. But I will tell you this, it was the kind of number that made the voice in my head, the one that had sounded like my uncle for most of the past 2 years, go completely, utterly quiet. Just quiet. Finally, I took a screenshot, one clean screenshot of the dashboard, the revenue figure, the date, the platform name clearly visible in the corner. No filter, no editing, the plain, unadorned truth of 26 months of work. I opened my messages, found my uncle's name. It was buried fairly deep in my recents because we hadn't exchanged a direct message since the one where he'd sent me that article. I opened the thread. That old article link was still there at the top, still unresponded to, sitting in the thread like a relic from a different chapter. I attached the screenshot. No caption, no explanation, no I told you so, no question mark, just the image, sent. I put my phone face down, finished my coffee, opened my laptop and started my working day. He didn't respond for 4 days. When he did, it was a voice note, 43 seconds long. I know the exact length because I listened to it 3 times. He said, "Congratulations, Zara. You've done well. I'm proud of you." Then, after a brief pause, "Your father would be proud too." I sat with that for a long time. That reference to my father, who had nodded at the dinner table, who had stayed quiet through all of it, who had trusted the room's consensus more than his daughter. My uncle invoking him now, in this moment of concession, knowing exactly what it would mean to me. It was the most sophisticated thing he'd ever said to me, and I still don't know whether it was genuine or calculated. I've thought about it many times. I think, and this is the uncomfortable, unresolved truth, I think it was both. People rarely do things that are entirely one or the other. Section: What collapse actually looks like. Here's what I mean when I say the antagonist's hubris breaks right before the collapse, because I want to be accurate about what actually collapsed. Because it wasn't dramatic. Nobody lost everything. Nobody had a public breakdown. My uncle's business continued operating at reduced capacity. My family still ate biryani on Sundays. What collapsed was a story. The story that had been told in that house for 26 months, quietly in the architecture of dinner table conversations and forwarded articles and pointed silences, the story that Zara had made a reckless decision and was heading for a fall. That story, which had been load-bearing for a lot of people, simply stopped being tenable. And the collapse of a story is actually more disorienting than the collapse of a business. Because a business failure is concrete. You can point to it. You can say, "See, that's what went wrong." But when a story about someone fails, when the narrative you've built about who they are and what they're capable of is disproved, you're left holding a worldview that doesn't fit anymore. And you have to decide what to do with that. Some people in my family updated their worldview. My mother had already been doing that for months, quietly and privately, in her own way. A couple of cousins reached out, genuinely, warmly, and asked questions about the business. Real questions. The kind that meant they were curious rather than skeptical. Some people stayed quiet, just folded the old narrative away somewhere and acted as though they'd never held it. I made a decision, early and deliberate, not to force acknowledgement from those people, not because I didn't want it, but because acknowledgement extracted through pressure is hollow. It doesn't fill the space you were hoping it would. And my uncle started asking my mother about my projects. Not to me directly, not yet, but through her. The way information has always moved in my family, through the people who've always kept the peace. My mother became, quietly and without ceremony, my biggest advocate in every room I wasn't in. I didn't ask her to do that, she just did. That mattered more than any number on a dashboard. Section: What victory actually feels like when you're still carrying the weight. I want to tell you something I haven't told anyone yet. Not publicly, anyway. The morning I sent that screenshot, before I put the phone down, before I started my working day, before I did any of the composed, controlled things I just described, I sat at my kitchen table and I cried. Not from sadness, not exactly from joy, either. From something more complicated that I don't have a clean word for. A kind of grief, maybe, for the version of me that had sat at that table with a printed pitch deck, so desperate to be seen by people who had already made up their minds. Grief for how long I'd let their verdict live in me, how many nights I'd lain awake doing their math instead of mine. And also, and I want to be precise here, grief for the relationship with my uncle that this whole episode had changed permanently. Not destroyed, we still see each other, we're still family, but something is different now. A layer of pretense has been removed that we never explicitly agreed to remove. And the version of our relationship that existed before that dinner, easy, assumed, never examined, that version is gone. I don't know if I got the better end of that trade. I honestly don't. I got clarity. I got truth. I got to stop performing a version of myself that fit their expectations. But I also lost the comfortable, uncomplicated version of belonging to that family. The version where you don't have to think too hard about the power dynamics, or the conditional love, or the way approval is rationed and withheld and deployed strategically. The revenge fantasy doesn't tell you about that part. The version of this story you imagine at the dinner table, the triumphant return, the undeniable numbers, the moment they have to admit they were wrong, that version is clean. It has a proper ending. Real life doesn't resolve at the credits. Section: What I wish I'd said sooner. If I could go back to that Sunday, if I could sit across from that version of myself with her printed pitch deck and her careful optimism and her need to be understood, I wouldn't tell her to protect herself. I wouldn't tell her not to share. I wouldn't tell her to be harder or colder or less hopeful about what that table might give her. I'd tell her, the people in this room are not your audience. Your audience is the woman scrolling her phone at midnight, wondering why nobody's talking about money in a way that sounds like her life. Your audience is the person who's been told the same version of the story about who gets to succeed and has started to believe it. Your audience is 100 people you haven't met yet, who are going to find your work at exactly the moment they need it. Build for them. Build as if this table doesn't exist. The table will catch up eventually. Here's the thing I keep coming back to, the question I haven't been able to fully answer, even now. Was I right to send the screenshot? Not legally, not strategically, morally. Because here's the case against it. My uncle is a man in his late 50s whose business is contracting, whose sense of authority is eroding, who is navigating, probably, a very private and painful recalibration of his own identity and legacy. And into that moment, I sent him a number. Wordless. Unapologetic. Designed to land, it landed. Was that compassionate? No. Was it proportionate? Probably. Was it the thing a more evolved version of me would have done? I don't know. I think, and this is the most honest thing I can tell you, I think I sent it because I still needed to. Because somewhere inside me, despite everything I'd built and everything I'd proven to myself, there was still a version of me sitting at that table with an untouched plate of biryani, and she needed the people in that room to know. And that's okay. That's human. I'm not going to perform enlightenment about it, but I want to be honest about it, because I think the stories we tell about revenge, the ones that get told with clean edges and clear villains and satisfying conclusions, those stories leave out this part. The part where you do the thing and it works, and you still feel the complexity of it afterwards, where the victory is real and the scars are also real and they exist in the same body at the same time. That's the part that doesn't get made into content very often. I'm making it into content now, I suppose. Make of that what you will. The documentary series launched 8 weeks ago. The first episode has over 200,000 views. My team is now 6 people. My platform covers topics that I care about deeply: financial literacy, the psychology of money in diaspora communities, the particular pressure that falls on South Asian women to make themselves smaller in order to be accepted. I have a new office, not a corner of my flat with a secondhand ring light. An actual office, with a window that gets real afternoon sun and a plant I haven't killed yet. My grandmother, who turned 81 at that birthday gathering where I overheard my uncle on the phone, asked me recently to explain what I do for work. I sat with her for an hour and explained it as plainly as I could. She listened carefully. Then she said, in Urdu, something that roughly translates to, "So you found a way to tell the truth and make money from it." That's a very old business. I think about that a lot. I really want to know, would you have sent the screenshot, or would you have let the numbers speak quietly and never said a word? Tell me honestly in the comments. I'll read every single one. And if you've been building something quietly while people around you wait for you to fail, subscribe and stick around. This channel is for you. The last time I saw my uncle was 3 weeks ago. He was at my grandmother's house. He was sitting in the chair by the window the way he always sits, with his tea and his particular expression of a man who has decided things. He looked up when I came in, and he did something he's never done before. He stood up, not theatrically, just stood. The way you stand when someone enters a room and you want them to know you see them. I looked at him. He looked at me. "Zara," he said, just my name. "Uncle," I said, and we left it there. 2 years of everything that had happened between us contained in an exchange of 4 syllables in a warm room that smelled of cardamom and someone's slow-cooked tea. My grandmother, from the kitchen, called out, "Zara, come sit with me." So I did. I left him standing by the window. Some stories don't end with a door slamming. Some of them just leave a door slightly open, and you walk through it or you don't, and either way, you carry everything that happened on your way to the threshold. I'm still carrying it, I think I always will. But I'm carrying it in a direction I chose, on a road I built, in a life that belongs to me. And that is enough.